Inside a Philippine rainforest, there is a tribe that has never stopped fighting a war most of the world does not know exists. They do not carry rifles. They do not carry rifles. They carry something older, a bloodline that stretches back tens of thousands of years, a set of laws written in a script almost nobody alive can still read, and a promise made to spirits that live in rivers, caves, and the roots of ancient trees. For centuries, they turned back pirates, foreign armies, and colonizers who wanted their land, their coastline, and their sacred caves. Today, the enemy has changed shape, but the tribe is still standing, still guarding, and still keeping a secret buried in limestone that could rewrite what we think we know about the first people of Southeast Asia. This is the story of the Tagbanua, the ancestral warriors of Palawan. Long before Spanish ships ever touched the shores of the Philippines, before any maps carried the name Palawan, there was already a civilization thriving in its jungles and caves. In a limestone cavern known today as Tabon Cave, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a human being who lived tens of thousands of years ago. One of the oldest human fossils ever found in Southeast Asia. Around that same cave system, generations of hunters, fishers, and farmers built a way of life so resilient that fragments of it still exist today. Many researchers believe the people living in and around these caves were the direct ancestors of a tribe that still walks those same forests now, carrying forward customs that predate most of recorded human history. That tribe calls itself Tagbanua, a name that simply means people of this place. It is a quiet, almost humble title for a group whose survival story is anything but quiet. For thousands of years, they lived along the rivers, coastlines, and karst mountains of central and northern Palawan, splitting eventually into two main branches: the Central Tagbanua and the Kalamian Tagbanua, each developing its own dialect and traditions while holding on to a shared identity. Their villages were small, tightly knit, and self-governed, often no larger than a few hundred people, organized around family lines traced through sisters rather than a single ruling family. When outsiders finally did arrive, the Tagbanua were not the passive figures history books often paint indigenous communities as being. When one of the earliest European chroniclers to reach the Philippines described the people of Palawan, he noted they carried blowguns, spears, and bladed weapons, and that they already had their own system of writing. A script built from 18 symbols capable of recording their laws, their trade agreements, and their beliefs. This was not a people waiting to be discovered. This was a people who had already built a functioning society, an economy, and a system of justice long before anyone from across the ocean ever set foot on their shores. That system of writing is one of the most remarkable and least talked about survivors of the ancient Philippines. Closely related to the ancient script used across the archipelago, the Tagbanua version was carved into bamboo and written on tree bark, read from bottom to top and left to right in vertical lines. It recorded everything from love letters to tribal agreements, and in a handful of remote communities near Coron, it is still taught and practiced today, one of only a few pre-colonial writing systems in the entire country that never fully disappeared. For centuries, being Tagbanua meant living inside a world where nature itself was alive and listening. Their cosmology was built around four major deities, each ruling a different domain of existence. There was a lord of the heavens who was believed to sit above the sky with his feet resting over the earth below. There was a spirit of the sea, invoked whenever sickness struck a village, believed to hold the power over healing and misfortune on the water. There was a guardian of the earth whose favor determined whether a harvest would be abundant or whether a family would go hungry. And deep beneath the ground, in a realm of shadow, there was a fourth spirit tied to the underworld itself. Every planting season, every fishing trip, every birth and every death was shaped by the belief that these unseen forces were always present, always watching, and always owed respect. At the center of this spiritual world stood a figure known as the Babylon, a ritual specialist who acted as the bridge between the physical world and the world of spirits. The Babylon guided every major event in Tagbanua life, presiding over births, marriages, harvests, and funerals, chanting prayers passed down through generations, and reading signs in nature that most outsiders would never notice. Even hunters preparing to enter the forest would seek spiritual guidance before setting out, believing that the spirits of departed relatives could help guide their dogs to hidden game, and that a hunt undertaken without respect for those unseen forces was a hunt destined to fail. One of the most striking Tagbanua traditions is the belief in what is often described as a true soul accompanied by several secondary souls. A concept far more complex than a simple idea of the afterlife. When a person died, their soul was believed to remain near the world of the living for 7 days, lingering by the grave during the day and quietly returning to visit their former home at night, observing how their family behaved in grief. On the 7th day, a ceremony was held to formally release the soul, sending it onward to the underworld to join the ancestors who came before. Graves were often positioned to face the setting sun, a quiet symbolic gesture marking the journey from light into the unknown. The Pagdiwata ceremony remains one of the most sacred and visually striking traditions still practiced by Tagbanua communities today. Part Thanksgiving ritual, part spiritual negotiation, it is performed to give thanks for a good harvest, to ask for healing during illness, or in some cases, to mend broken relationships between feuding families. Special platforms and rafts are constructed for the ceremony, and offerings of rice, rice wine, and betel nut are prepared for the spirits. Communities gather to chant, drum, and dance late into the night, with elders leading prayers meant to draw the attention of ancestors and nature spirits alike, asking them to bless the community for another season. For all their spiritual depth, the Tagbanua were never a people who simply waited for history to happen to them. Their location along Palawan's coastlines put them directly in the path of trade networks stretching from the Hindu-Indonesian kingdoms of maritime Southeast Asia to the powerful sultanates of Borneo and the Sulu Sea. Through these contacts, Tagbanua leaders known as Ginuu received titles of authority passed down from Muslim rulers to the south, blending outside political influence with their own deeply rooted customary law. Later, when Spanish colonizers arrived seeking to convert and control the islands, the Tagbanua retreated further into the interior and highlands. Choosing isolation over submission, protecting their customs by simply becoming harder to reach. Even that isolation was eventually tested. When American colonial administrators took control of the Philippines in the early 20th century, a penal colony was established on Palawan that expanded directly into traditional Tagbanua territory, displacing communities who had lived there for generations. Migrants from other islands began arriving in growing numbers, bringing new religions, new economies, and new pressures on land the Tagbanua had never needed a deed or a document to claim, because to them, the land had simply always been theirs. What makes the story of the Tagbanua remarkable is not simply that they survived these waves of outside pressure, but that they eventually found a way to turn their ancestral identity into a form of modern protection. In the waters around Coron Island, the Tagbanua holds something few indigenous communities in the entire country can claim: formal recognition over one of the most breathtaking landscapes in the Philippines. The stunning turquoise waters of Kayangan Lake and the dramatic cliffs surrounding Barracuda Lake sit inside land and water that Tagbanua communities were eventually granted legal ancestral rights over, making them not just cultural custodians, but literal gatekeepers of some of the most photographed scenery in Southeast Asia. That means every visitor who marvels at Coron's famous lakes is, whether they realize it or not, stepping onto land the Tagbanua fought for centuries to keep. Entrance fees collected from tourism now flow back into Tagbanua communities, funding schools, healthcare, and infrastructure, giving a tribe that once had no formal legal recognition an actual stake in the modern economy built around their ancestral home. It is a rare example of an indigenous community using cultural identity not as a relic to be studied, but as a living tool for economic survival. Alongside tourism, the Tagbanua continue one of their oldest and most dangerous traditions: the harvesting of edible bird nests from the ceilings of towering limestone caves. These nests, built by swiftlets and prized for centuries as a delicacy across parts of Asia, are gathered by climbers who scale bamboo scaffolding and sheer rock faces using techniques passed down through generations, often working in near total darkness deep inside cave systems few outsiders will ever enter. It is a livelihood inherited from ancestors who mapped these caves long before anyone thought to draw a tourist brochure. And it remains one of the clearest living links between the Tagbanua of today and the cave-dwelling communities archaeologists believe were their ancestors. Despite centuries of contact with outside cultures, the Tagbanua have managed something few indigenous groups in a rapidly modernizing country have achieved: the preservation of a distinct language, a surviving writing system, and a spiritual worldview that continues alongside modern conveniences rather than being erased by them. Many Tagbanua families today use the same aluminum pots and plastic containers as any modern Filipino household, yet still keep prized heirloom jars, brass boxes, and ceremonial gongs passed down for generations, treating them not as museum pieces, but as active, spiritually significant possessions, still used in ritual life. Their villages today can range from small clusters of a few dozen families to larger settlements of several hundred people, still organized in many cases around family units traced through the maternal line, a structural echo of how their ancestors organized society long before any outside government drew borders across their island. Leadership in many communities is still guided by respected elders whose authority rests not on wealth or political power, but on their command of customary law and their relationship to the spiritual world. A form of governance that has functioned quietly and effectively for far longer than most modern legal systems have existed. What ties every era of Tagbanua history together, from the ancient cave dwellers of Tabon to the modern guardians of Coron's lakes, is a single unbroken idea: that the land is not something to be owned in the way outsiders often understand ownership, but something to be protected, negotiated with, and respected as a living presence. Every ritual, every taboo, every offering left facing the setting sun reflects the same underlying philosophy that has allowed this tribe to survive waves of foreign contact. Colonization, displacement, and modernization without losing the core of who they are. Today, as new pressures arrive in the form of climate change, mass tourism, and continued disputes over ancestral land rights, the descendants of Palawan's oldest known inhabitants are once again being asked to defend the same forests, caves, and waters their ancestors protected for tens of thousands of years. The weapons have changed from blowguns and spears to legal documents and environmental advocacy, but the mission has stayed exactly the same: protect the place their name literally means they belong to. The Tagbanua are not a vanished people from a history book, a forgotten footnote beneath a more famous ancient fossil. They are a living, breathing continuation of one of the oldest human stories in the entire Philippine archipelago. Warriors not defined by the weapons they once carried, but by the sheer persistence required to still be standing, still speaking their language, still performing their ceremonies, and still guarding their ancestral home after 50,000 years of history tried in every possible way to make them disappear.